All right, I'm finally getting around to doing this. I put it off. Well, I had this beatnik party I had, and I had friends over, and life is getting back to normal. And I think I'm kind of don't want to say goodbye to Johnson and Boswell in a funny way and everything. It's kind of a real transition to go from this book. So I procrastinated, but all good things must come to an end. So here we go. I'm going to read the last couple pages. Try not to cry and give a couple thoughts. So this, I think we ended with Boswell kind of summing up Johnson. I'll read the last paragraph just to get us. Oh yeah, this Colonel Sanders thing. It's a long story going. The character of Samuel Johnson has, I trust, been so developed in the course of this work that they who have honored it with approval may be considered as well acquainted with him. As, however, it may be expected that I should collect into one view the capital and distinguishing features of this extraordinary man, I shall endeavor to acquit myself of that part of my biographical undertaking, however difficult it may be to do that which many of my readers will do better for themselves. I think I already read this footnote. There's a footnote here, but I think it's just Boswell plugging his Journal of the Tour of the Hebrides, as he often does. I'm going to miss those plugs. Maybe I guess I can read that book next. Anyway, Johnson's figure was large and well-formed, and his countenance of the cast of an ancient statue. Yet his appearance was rendered strange and somewhat uncouth by convulsive cramps, by the scars of that distemper which it was once imagined the royal touch could cure, and by a slovenly mode of dress. He had the use only of one eye, yet so much does mind govern and even supply the deficiency of organs, that his visual perceptions, as far as they extended, were uncommonly quick and accurate. So morbid was his temperament, that he never knew the natural joy of a free and vigorous use of his limbs. When he walked, it was like the struggling gait of one in fetters. When he rode, he had no command or direction of his horse, but was carried as if in a balloon. That with his constitution and habits of life he should have lived 75 years is a proof that an inherent vivida vis, lively force, is a powerful preservative of the human frame. Man is, in general, made up of contradictory qualities, and these will ever show themselves in strange succession, where a consistency in appearance, at least, if not in reality, has not been attained by long habits of philosophical discipline. In proportion to the native vigor of the mind, the contradictory qualities will be the more prominent and more difficult to be adjusted, and therefore we are not to wonder that Johnson exhibited an eminent example of this remark, which I have made upon human nature. At different times he seemed a different man in some respects, not, however, in any great or essential article upon which he had fully employed his mind and settled certain principles of duty, but only in his manners and in the display of argument and fancy in his talk. He was prone to superstition, but not to credulity. Though his imagination might incline him to a belief of the marvelous and the mysterious, his vigorous reason examined the evidence with jealousy. He was a sincere and zealous Christian of High Church of England and monarchical principles, which he would not tamely suffer to be questioned, and had, perhaps, at an early period, narrowed his mind somewhat too much, both as to religion and politics. His being impressed with the danger of extreme latitude in either, though he was of a very independent spirit, occasioned his appearing somewhat unfavorable to the prevalence of that noble freedom of sentiment which is the best possession of man. Nor can it be denied that he had many prejudices, which, however, frequently suggested many of his pointed sayings that rather show a playfulness of fancy than any settled malignity. He was steady and inflexible in maintaining the obligations of religion and morality, both from a regard for the order of society and from a veneration for the great source of all order, correct, nay, stern in his tastes, hard to please and easily offended, impetuous and irritable in his temper, but of a most humane and benevolent heart, which showed itself not only in a more liberal charity, as far as his circumstances would allow, but in 1,000 instances of active benevolence. In the Olla Podrida, a collection of essays published at Oxford, there is an admirable paper upon the character of Johnson, written by the Reverend Dr. Horne, the late excellent Bishop of Norwich. The following passage is eminently happy. To reject wisdom because the person of him who communicates it is uncouth, and his manners are inelegant, what is it but to throw away a pineapple and design for a reason that roughness of its coat? Circumstances of active, by 1,000 instances of active benevolence. He was afflicted with a bodily disease, which made him often restless and fretful, and with a constitutional melancholy, the clouds of which darkened the brightness of his fancy, and gave a gloomy cast to his whole course of thinking. We, therefore, ought not to wonder at his sallies of impatience and passion at any time, especially when provoked by obtrusive ignorance or presuming petulance. And allowance must be made for his uttering hasty and satirical sallies, even against his best friends. And surely when it is considered that amid sickness and sorrow he exerted his faculties in so many works for the benefit of mankind, and particularly that he achieved the great and admirable dictionary of our language, we must be astonished at his resolution. The solemn text of him to whom much is given, much will be required, seems to have been even ever present to his mind in a vigorous sense, and to have made him dissatisfied with his labors and acts of goodness, however comparatively great, so that the unavoidable conscientiousness of his superiority was, in that respect, a cause of disquiet. He suffered so much from this, and from the gloom which perpetually haunted him, and made solitude frightful, that it may be said of him, if in this life only he had hope, he was of all men most miserable. He loved praise when it was brought to him, but was too proud to seek for it. He was somewhat susceptible of flattery, and he was general and unconfined in his studies. He cannot be considered as master of any one particular science, but he had accumulated a vast and various collection of learning and knowledge, which was so arranged in his mind as to be ever in readiness to be brought forth. But his superiority over other learned men consisted chiefly in what may be called the art of thinking, the art of using his mind, a certain continual power of seizing the usual substance of all that he knew and exhibiting it in a clear and forcible manner, so that knowledge, which we often see to be no better than lumber in men of dull understanding, was in him true, evident, and actual wisdom. His moral precepts are practical, for they are drawn from an intimate acquaintance with human nature. His maxims carry conviction, for they are founded on the basis of common sense, and a very attentive and minute survey of real life. His mind was so full of imagery that he might have been perpetually a poet, yet it is remarkable that, however rich his prose is in this respect, his poetical pieces in general have not much of that splendor, but are rather distinguished by strong sentiment and acute observation, conveyed in harmonious and energetic verse, particularly in heroic couplets. Though usually grave and even awful, A-W-E, full, in his deportment, he possessed uncommon and peculiar powers of wit and humor. He frequently indulged himself in colloquial pleasantry, and the heartiest merriment was often enjoyed in his company, with this great advantage, that as it was entirely free from any poisonous tincture of vice or impiety, it was salutary to those who shared in it. He had accustomed himself to such accuracy in his common conversation that he at all times expressed his thoughts with great force and an elegant choice of language, the effect of which was aided by his having a loud voice and a slow, deliberate utterance. Though a perfect resemblance of Johnson is not to be found in any age, parts of his character are admirably expressed by Clarendon in drawing that of Lord Falkland, whom the noble and masterly historian describes at his seat near Oxford. Quote, such an immenseness of wit, such a solidity of judgment, so infinite a fancy, bound in by a most logical rationalization. His acquaintance was cultivated by the most polite and accurate men, so that his house was an university in less volume, whither they came, not so much for repose as study, and to examine and refine those grosser propositions which laziness and consent must current in conversation, or made current in conversation, rather. Bayle's account of Menage, or Menage, may also be quoted as exceedingly applicable to the great subject of this work. Quote, his illustrious friends erected a very glorious monument to him in the collection entitled Menagiana. Those who judge of things aright will confess that this collection is very proper to show the extent of genius and learning which was the character of Menage. And I may be bold to say that the excellent works he published will not distinguish him from other learned men so advantageously as this. To publish books of great learning, to make Greek and Latin verses exceedingly well turned, is not a common talent, I own. Neither is it extremely rare. It is incomparatively more difficult to find men who can furnish discourse about an infinite number of things, and who can diversify them 100 ways. How many authors are there who are admired for their works on account of their vast learning that is displayed in them, who are not able to sustain a conversation? Those who know Menage only by his books might think he resembled those learned men. But if they show the Menagiana, you distinguish him from them and make him known by a talent which is given to very few learned men. There it appears that he was a man who spoke offhand 1,000 good things. His memory extended to what was ancient and modern, to the coarse and to the city, to the dead and to the living languages, to things serious and things jocose. In a word, to 1,000 sorts of subjects. That which appeared a trifle to some readers of the Menagiana, who did not consider circumstances, caused admiration in other readers, who minded the difference between what a man speaks without preparation and that which he prepares for the press. And therefore we cannot sufficiently commend the care with which his illustrious friends took to erect a monument so capable of giving him immortal glory. They were not obliged to rectify what they had heard him say, for in so doing, they had not been faithful historians of his conversations. And that, my friends, is the last footnote in this book. Now, where was I? The effect of which was aided by his having a loud voice and a slow, deliberate utterance. In Johnson were united a most logical head with a most fertile imagination, which gave him an extraordinary advantage in arguing, for he could reason close or wide, as he saw best for the moment. Exulting in his intellectual strength and dexterity, he could, when he pleased, be the greatest sophist that ever contended in the list of declamation, and from a spirit of contradiction and a delight in showing his powers, he would often maintain the wrong side with equal warmth and ingenuity, so that, when there was an audience, his real opinions could seldom be gathered from his talk. Though when he was in company with a single friend, he would discuss a subject with genuine fairness. But he was too conscientious to make error permanent and pernicious by deliberately writing it. And in all his numerous works, he earnestly inculcated what appeared to him to be the truth, his piety being constant, and the ruling principle of all his conduct. Such was Samuel Johnson, a man whose talents, acquirements, and virtues were so extraordinary that the more his character is considered, the more he will be regarded by the present age and by posterity with admiration and reverence. And that's the book. That's page 1402. Now we could get into the index now. That's another 100 pages, I think. Or, let's see, the index runs till 1492, but I don't think I'll do that. So that's the book, yeah. Wow. So it's kind of a boring book, Sure, it's a boring book, and I don't really think, sadly, not too many people care about Boswell or Johnson anymore. But I liked it. It was encompassed all genres. It had ghost stories in there, philosophy, law, long law, essays, even some romance near the beginning, a lot of comedy, bad puns, bad poetry, some good poetry, a lot of letters, had a little bit of everything. And it's got that life of a breath of in its entirety, kind of, you really get exhausted by it. And it kind of reminded me of that Star Trek episode where Picard, gets the flute, and he lives his entire life on this planet, and it comes back and like no time has happened. That's kind of what it's, it's really, reading a book like that, you really kind of do get his whole life, and you really feel kind of close to him in this world in a different way. So it was more immersive to me than Glastonbury, which seems so short and long ago now. I can barely remember what was happening in that book. And it's kind of cute in a way how much Boswell really liked Johnson, and that kind of he wrote a whole damn book, this whole damn long book, exhaustive research on it. I think it's like probably one of the most well known at the time, or not the first really exhausted biography like that. And well, there was other biographies obviously, but the scope of it is incredible. When you think about it, how much time went into collecting all these pieces, and all the boring parts where he's into the accuracy of it, and the people writing, in later editions rebuffing, actually this didn't happen. And yeah, writing down all those conversations he had with Johnson and all the other people. And it's funny because Johnson kind of reminded me of this guy. I used to go to this coffee shop I used to go to. He used to sit outside, and he had this group around him, and he was kind of a blowhard, and he had this clique, and he'd pontificate about every topic imaginable. I can't help but think about that guy when I read about Johnson. And also, he kind of I don't know why, but he kind of reminds me of Roger Ebert. Like, he's like somebody who, I probably don't agree with most of what Johnson says, but he's likable. He's got this, like, he's got a reason for his opinions, and you might not agree with him, but he's fair, and I think he has like a moral compass, and he follows his ethics, and he's generally a good person. He's inflexible. He's got this inflexible moral code. But he sticks with it, and he's good to his friends, and, sometimes he seems very unfair to women, but, considering the time, and, he was married, very young, and his wife died very, when she was very old. But then, in other parts, he's very fair to, women. He's got a lot of women friends. So, and he was, pretty forward thinking when it came to slavery too, being against it, and I kind of accidentally left his servant all his money, right? So, but it's interesting, to see like the Tory perspective, and like read from that, because being an American, first of all, these things are like the history of America back then is so, we just read, the kind of Cliff Notes version of it. So to see the different, the actual other opinion of that is pretty amazing and so well articulated sometimes. I remember there was a part when he's arguing about, the parishioners voting for who's the minister, I think, of a church, and being against that because there'll be chaos, and nobody will be happy with anybody. I think I was reading that around the election too, so that was, an interesting perspective on that. I did not like the poetry in there, though. The rhyming poetry, not a fan. Although there was a poem at the end by Johnson that I actually did like a lot. I think it was like a silly little poem he wrote for some young fop or something, but it was, actually pretty good. I can't really, take me too long to find my favorite parts in it, but there were a lot of, there was one part where somebody mentioned somebody dying of, oh, shoot. I'd have to, I saved screenshots of it, but there was some ridiculous parts. There was like a makeover scene with Johnson that was pretty good. I like his letter to his, early on, I think he wrote a letter to his friend whose wife was dying, telling him to like remember, to write down everything you remember about him, remember about her, because that'll change. That was really touching and, very true. And that kind of made me, respect him a little bit more back then. Maybe beforehand I wasn't really into it, but then that kind of made me think about it, get into him more. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are like, this is different. I never really thought about the Enlightenment time period before, honestly. So, a lot of this history is not known to me, and it was interesting to see how vastly different the perspective was for everything, but also just about things I had no knowledge about previously. So it was a good thing to read for that. Good. That teacher I had a long time ago was right. Back then, if he was treating me a little better, maybe we could have had a good conversation about this time period. I'm excited someday to go see some Johnson stuff in England. That to actually mean something to me now. Also, Glastonbury stuff would be cool too. And the whole tour of England would be nice. Maybe a tour of the Hebrides as well. That would be fun. But I have to read that book first, I guess. And yeah, a lot of Johnson's kind of psychology touched me too. That he was, he had a lot of melancholy. So did Boswell, and but kind of a big procrastinator. He seems to, diddle away, and then at some point, do a lot of stuff at once. And also, it seemed like he was fairly successful later in his life. Not so much early on. But when he was actually kind of an older man, was when he really came into stride. So that reading about that was very, very positive thinking. Certainly, all the parts about mortality when Johnson was dying there for the last, 200 pages. Considering what everybody's been through this year and a half, it's a good reminder of I could say some cheesy stuff here, but I actually believe it, that you got to kind of be thankful for each day and, think about your morality, how it's all going to end, and do the best you can, Wow, this is getting dark, both dark and cheesy now. So maybe I should stop. But thank you, Patrick. Thank myself for plowing through that book. I'm going to miss it. I am going to miss it more than I think I'm going to miss this more than Glastonbury, because this is like when I started this was the real like, oh, we're going to be here for, we're going to be in this COVID world for a while. And it's just, this is all on basically one person or two people if you want to count Boswell. I can't really talk too much about Boswell. He's kind of annoying sometimes, but, he's kind of, you get used to him. You kind of like him after a while. But yeah, it's a long book, and you never really think you're going to make it through it. But step by step, you can do anything, right? You can even read this long, pretty boring book. It's a boring book. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It's a boring book, but but very worthwhile. I'm glad I read it. And now all these videos exist of me reading it in various quality. I think I got better at the end because I learned, like to use some inflection in my voice, even though, I don't know where it's going. You can kind of, sense where it's going to go, so you can like. I think I got pretty good at that. I gotta say I'm getting better at it now that it's all over. I did kind of want to do read The Anatomy of Melancholy, but maybe I'll save that for the next pandemic or something, or who knows. But that's always there. So, well, until next time, I guess this is it. Bye from Boswell. Cheers. Be safe. Have a good summer. Bye-bye.